CBDCs versus stablecoins, exploring the role in creating stable, sustainable and socially acceptable economic prosperity. The person moderating it is Arjun Kharpal. He's senior tech correspondent at CNBC. So here to shoot an arrow right into the heart of the question, please welcome Arjun.
Thank you for that wonderful intro, and thank you to all of those who made it back after the break. You can go away and tell everybody who missed this how great this session was. I just want to introduce the topic today, CBDCs and stablecoins. Now, we've seen the rise of stablecoins over the past few years, and they've really become the backbone of crypto trading at the same time. Central banks globally are talking about issuing their own digital currencies, central bank digital currencies, and we've seen countries like China push ahead. Others are still figuring out what exactly that means. So what I want to achieve today in this discussion is really looking at the view towards the industry, towards CBDCs and stablecoins, their relationship, and ultimately the question is whether CBDCs are ultimately needed. So let me just introduce my wonderful panel to kick off this discussion. Firstly, Teana Baker-Taylor, Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Strategy at Circle. Thomas Moser, Governing Board of the Swiss National Bank. Lily Liu, who is the President of the Solana Foundation, and Roland, Tegeder, the chairman of the Rain Foundation. Please welcome them to the stage. Thanks, all of you, for joining today. So let's kick off the discussion and set up a bit for our audience how the industry is thinking about CBDCs and stablecoins. And Teana, I'll start with you a little bit. Right now, stablecoins are really about allowing traders to trade in and out of cryptocurrencies. They've become the backbone really of crypto trading, as I mentioned there in the intro. But what more can we expect from stablecoins going forward in the future in terms of in the real economy, real use cases for people?
Yeah, so I think stablecoins certainly did originate as a capital markets or a crypto capital markets infrastructure to be able to move value. We've seen what we call the utility phase of stablecoins rapidly increasing over the past couple of years, certainly in the last year. And those use cases are really focused around payments specifically. And those payments could be potentially retail payments, corporate treasury, being able to pool treasury accounts, cross-border payments especially, both for retail and for corporates, but also being used in areas like humanitarian aid. In Ukraine, for example, Circle has partnered with UNHCR and is able to disperse humanitarian aid or indeed any kind of disaster relief. And what's unique about that is really the speed at which those assets can be sent and settled and distributed. And so for those use cases, it's a really, really practical evolution. I think in the cross-border space too, we're seeing a lot of convergence with traditional financial players and using stablecoins for settlement. So another great example of that would be the Stellar Network has a partnership with MoneyGram International, which has branches all over the world, similar to like a Western Union. And if you have a Stellar wallet, you can receive USDC and walk into a MoneyGram anywhere in the world and cash out. It's incredibly fast, and it's significantly cheaper. So compared with a traditional cross-border transaction around 5.6%, that transaction would cost about 1.6%. So I think as we're moving toward this utility phase, we'll start to see stablecoins being used as a very efficient and effective settlement asset.
And Thomas, for you can give us the central bank perspective. How are you thinking about CBDCs here? There are so many different design ideas being floated and put into practice. How is the SMB thinking about CBDCs and potential use cases, and of course, stablecoins on the flip side?
Well, thank you. I think it's very important to differentiate between wholesale payments, really large value payments between financial institutions, banks, and then retail payments. And so what we are doing at the Swiss National Bank is we look at wholesale CBDC. There would be a CBDC that is available for financial institutions to make these large or high value payments among themselves. And that is where traditionally settlement has been in central bank money already today. So if the financial market infrastructure of the future will be blockchain-based, if the industry moves to the blockchain, then I think it's natural that we would like to have settlement of large value payments between financial institutions in central bank money, because central bank money doesn't have a credit risk. But retail payments, which are traditionally done in commercial bank money, which are not systemically important, I think that's a very different issue, and that's also why you have this differentiation between wholesale CBDC, where it would be just replacing what already exists today, just move everything on the blockchain, and then retail payments, where in the digital area at least, central banks have not been active so far, and I think there is the question whether you need that. So the position of the Swiss National Bank has been, we do not really need a retail CBDC, at least not at this stage, and we could leave that to stablecoins to have the retail payments done in stablecoins.
And that's
Good choice.
Please go ahead.
Fully support.
Well, that sets up us nicely for the next part of the discussion, which is, I think, around how necessary are CBDCs and do stablecoins do the job? And the Richmond Fed put out a report and they say CBDCs might be unnecessary if they don't achieve something different than stablecoins backed by reserves. Lily, I'll come on to you to sort of open up that point a bit, because we were talking a bit before this panel about the necessity of CBDCs and stablecoins. So as you look at that relationship going forward, are CBDCs necessary?
Well, I think that I like Thomas's perspective on this, which is it's important to differentiate between wholesale use cases, potentially retail use cases. I think that clearly the credit risk of a CBDC is a little bit different from some of the options we have in the market today. There's certainly value in that. I do think that a combination of different solutions would probably be more ideal. To me, what's sort of more important than this framing of the question is not just whether it's a stablecoin or a CBDC, but really that it's built on open architecture, right? Since the beginning of when, I still remember when Bitcoin was supposed to be sort of the billion transaction payment network, there's been so much discussion around blockchain being better than Visa. The reality of the situation is that 15 years on, crypto is actually really bad for payments, with the exception of now some of these privately issued stablecoins on a select handful of networks. And so if we're talking about sort of use cases that are not just recursive lending until it all falls apart, then I think what is interesting to think about is stablecoins as basically being sort of programmable money layer upon which there'll be a new generation of call it DeFi, but DeFi 2.0 types of applications built on top of that. And that to me, is the interesting sort of application space that can be born from stablecoins and behind the scenes, as long as open architecture, which is required for it to be truly programmable, right, open source and all the rest, may have a combination of CBDC as well as stablecoin architecture in the background. From my understanding, one of the most advanced CBDC efforts out there does not distinguish between wholesale and retail. It's a few hours east of here, large country, and the efforts are rather ambitious. And if we're honest, you get into an area that start to potentially become very invasive on just everyday life. And so I think that that's also something we really need to think about second and third, fourth order consequences for. Yeah,
we'll unpack a bit more of that. Roland, I just want to come to you to sort of give your point of view on this debate around the need for CBDCs in a world where stablecoins are fully backed by reserves and perhaps even more, better regulated than they are now.
Yes.
And then, ultimately, what kind of impact that can have on the real economy.
Yes. You see, my perspective on this is that I look at it as an investor, and there are investors here. And I want to invest in a really good money. And what is a really good money? A really good money is one that doesn't blow up. It is one that doesn't have runs on banks. I also want to be sure that nobody can snoop on me and all those things. And so I look at CBDC from the perspective, just like you said, it will not be a centralized effort with a central bank running everything. It will have to be just like our banking system already is. We have commercial banks, that do one thing. They're commercial enterprises. They operate multiple platforms. And the same thing will be the case for CBDC. So I see it as a coordinated but ultimately decentralized organization. And it's meant to deliver more stability to me than we currently have. And that is, I think, the role of CBDC going forward in the financial architecture that we have.
And Teana, you speak to a lot of regulators. When it comes to the view on CBDCs and stablecoins, are they sort of the view that we've heard so far, that perhaps actually stablecoins may do a job, and any kind of CBDC needs to be programmable, or are they sort of a little bit more closed off to that idea? Because it's hard to see, and Lily mentioned, without naming them, China, that's a very different, obviously, political system, very different monetary system as well. And they're very much PBOC, the central bank controls all of what's happening there with the digital yuan. But are other central banks and regulators you speak to more open to this idea of something a little bit more open source?
So I think it's a mixed bag as you kind of look across the world. Europe has been very outspoken that they intend to issue a digital euro within the next 5 years. The kind of juxtaposition of the policy around the digital euro and the regulation of stablecoins within MiCA, the Markets and Crypto Asset Regulation, which will come into force next year in Europe, is does have some very strong intentions to protect monetary sovereignty of the euro and monetary policy, as well as stability in the European Union around that currency. However, what it does do is put in place some restrictions that, when you look at the global flow of value, I think could potentially become problematic in Europe if they stay exactly the way that they are. And I think that the thought is, that the ECB is going to issue this digital euro, and so then what will the point for stablecoins be anyway? In other jurisdictions, there's almost a complete reverse view. I think it's a very kind of mixed bag in the US around the views on CBDCs. There's a lot of concern around, privacy and having, this honeypot of information that is available, and how might the government not only just know what we're doing, but use that information about what we're doing and how we're spending our money. And then I think there's, talking about the programmability, we've seen kind of some early discussion coming back to Europe around being limiting how much of the CBDC you can hold. I think it's like 3,000 euros, and it should only be used for this, and it should only be used for that. And so, as Roland said, if you're looking at, I want good money, that doesn't seem very flexible. That isn't the way that cash works today. And so, to me, that there's a lot of friction there. There's something like 105 countries in the world that are evaluating a CBDC or have a CBDC kind of project up and running. And in the majority of them, they're not considering, with great intention, open source technology. And so then it begs the question, what's the point? And I think that one of the things that certainly USDC is able to do is flow around the world on open source blockchains, 9 chains, and another 6 or 7 bridges, so 15 in total, and that could continue to scale. And so you don't have this kind of on and off ramp, issue as you move from country to country. Now, are countries looking at that flow of value and asking questions around what does that mean for their kind of local monetary sovereignty and monetary policy? Of course, right? Does this mean that the internet will be dollarized? Potentially, right? If this is the way that we go. But again, we have a system now of public and private money, and I think we will continue to do so. And those assets will serve different use cases for different people. But if it's not going to be open source technology and we're not going to have great privacy controls, I think it's very problematic.
And Thomas, what Teana said there really speaks to the heart of what central banks are thinking about, right? Monetary policy transmission, sovereignty of monetary policy in a world of stable coins, and therefore the ECB, for example, feels the need to go ahead with a digital euro. How are you thinking about it? Because, is there need then in a world of, let's say, we go the ECB route for stablecoins? Will they just be regulated out of existence? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, there are clearly different situations in different countries, and there might be, there are different needs for a CBDC. So I wouldn't rule out totally that you would not need a CBDC. And I think the things Teana mentioned, if it starts to really interfere with your monetary policy, if you have real financial stability issues, then or if you have a monopoly developing, that money has economies of scale, and in such situations, I could see a government wanting to issue a CBDC to retain its monetary sovereignty. The situation is not entirely new because the phenomena of dollarization already exists today. So usually the best means against dollarization is to have a very good monetary policy and provide the sound and stable money. Roland talked about it, and then there is no need for the citizens to switch to something else. Now, of course, if the entire economy now switches to blockchain and a national bank, a central bank, is not able to issue its own money on that blockchain, then that becomes a different situation where you probably want to issue a CBDC on a blockchain.
And what does that mean for interoperability then, Lily, in terms of a CBDC and perhaps even something like Solana?
Well, I think your point that you need to have good monetary policy, absolutely. Unfortunately, very few seem to be capable of doing that on a sustained basis. So absolutely, that is always ideal, that all 100, however many countries in the world all have extremely responsible fiscal and monetary policy. We would all be thumbs up for that. But it's probably a small handful that actually do. In terms of interoperability, I feel that, per Teana's comment, if you're going to take a CBDC, create a private network, kind of what's the point? It might be it might be a bit more efficient than what we have in the US, which is ACH, SWIFT, which are fairly antiquated. Okay, sure, or Zelle, or whatever they've spent the last 10 years doing. But it's not so much better than what we have right now, and it captures none of the promise of open payment networks and what blockchain was sort of proposed to actually do. So I think that in terms of putting, potentially if CBDCs, if they were to be on open networks, I think that'd be a different conversation. But I would not expect that the majority of governments out there take that approach, because that's, frankly, not necessarily aligned with their interests.
In fact, if I may jump in here, that's exactly 2 experiments we're doing at the Swiss National Bank, to put a wholesale CBDC on a public blockchain. And we have a kind of a multi-purpose CBDC project, which would also allow us to put it on a public blockchain. It's just experimental. It's nothing the Swiss National Bank is committed to, but I fully agree with you. I think, and also on the privacy issue, I think privacy and open source, open networks, that's the only thing that would really be a step forward.
And I think what you'll find is those that are open-minded about putting things on open networks are those that are also fiscally, have good fiscal monetary policy. So then you'll likely see a bifurcation of those that want to keep it all private. Well, it's because they've got something to hide and something to protect, and because their competence is maybe below what their citizens expect, right? And so I think you'll start to see that bifurcation. Now, I don't know exactly how you have a very sort of amicable resolution to those types of things, but it is precisely one of these, potentially interesting things that could arise, where now anyone with an internet connection could potentially vote with their wallet and say, I don't really want to be a part of this economy where inflation is X and taxes are Y and Y, right?
I think that's a really great point.
Sorry,
Tina, can I just bring, he just wanted to bring in a point, and I'll come to you after. Roland?
Yes, you see, there is a deep instability in our existing monetary economic system, and that is the nexus between the value economy and the transaction economy. And our commercial banks are sitting at that nexus, and they're fighting that every day. And that's why we have run on banks. If the assets are impaired at the bank level, we are trying to get the money out. So there's a transaction economy and there is a value and investing economy. And in this system, we currently have no way to tease that apart. This is a profound vulnerability in our current monetary architecture. And the way I see the potential for CBDC is to provide stability of that instability. And what this would mean is that you have the CBDC more like be the transaction economy, and the institutions running that are narrow banks. They don't lend. And then you have the banks that can lend and that can fail. And so you are teasing apart what is this horrible nexus where you have bank guarantees up to a certain level, you have to combine the investing and the transacting economy, and we have run-on banks and all that kind of stuff. So I'm making a case that CBDC may actually be just the right tool if you put it on a narrow bank platform versus the commercial bank platform, that you for once create the start of an organization of our monetary system that isn't just running up and down, boom and bust, and we have more stability of the transactional economy, even if that bank over there, that commercial bank, goes under. I think this is incredibly important. But to your point, just to give me one more second, the fundamental reason why this is so difficult to achieve is, of course, the issue that I think you brought up or someone else brought up earlier. We don't want to be beholden by Big Brother, and all of our transactions and everything that we do is known to everyone. So fundamentally, what we have to achieve is we have to have this whole thing run on a privacy platform that is solid. Now, there are cryptographers here, and you can do that. So we need to create the kind of CBDC as a transactional money running on narrow banks with the right cryptography so that Big Brother doesn't know everything I do. And I think that would be a profound impact to the stability of monetary systems. So that's the other side of how you might want to look at this.
Teana, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I think what I wanted to kind of summarize too is I don't necessarily think that this is specifically about blockchain per se.
I agree.
So, CBDCs being, an open source or a closed, walled garden network. I think that one of the things that, policymakers, large industry, big tech, all of us need to understand, and a classic example of this is ChatGPT. So there's a little chart that's running around the internet that basically shows, Instagram took this long to have this many users, and Twitter took this long to have this many users, and ChatGPT basically got to that many users in 5 days. So the exponential growth and adoption of, disruptive technology and digitization of the way that we live and, share information, our healthcare, our communications, our money, the way we transact, et cetera. All these things are fundamentally changing. And so, we are in this blockchain ecosystem and see ways that we can improve, a number of the ways that we share that value, whether it's information, data, or money. And so I think if we look at the CBDC stablecoin settlement asset through that lens, if we're not future-proofing the way that we're able to share value, then, a CBDC that might be issued on a closed loop, by the time it comes to be launched, is going to be redundant already. And so I think that we just need to be thinking about these issues, the issues of privacy, the issues of digital ID, the issues of how AI plays a role in all of this stuff. Those are critical issues, and solving the problem of today. We definitely have a wholesale banking settlement problem, right, between banks. But solving for a problem for today is not necessarily going to be helpful in 10 years, and we're going to be re-engineering the whole thing again, and that would just be silly.
I completely agree. Let me make 2 points, if I may, on the back of this. The first one, the missing pieces of technology that we have to create for CBDC to do what you're talking about is the right kind of privacy technology that allows regulatability without leaking all the information about us. So we need regulatable blockchain technology. That's a technical problem. Secondly, as you pointed out, we need to reinvent digital identity. The world right now is talking about digital identity at best in the form of self-sovereign identity. But we can have a long conversation, and I can convince you quickly that that's not going to cut it. So we need a better form of digital identity to do that. So these are two significant technology changes that have to happen in innovations. The other thing that is often forgotten, and you sort of brought it up and you're at Circle, so you're stablecoin people, this is the question of money supply. You see, money supply is absolutely central. The idea, all the chains that are running out there, blockchains, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these things, they're running on either a deterministic or pre-programmed money supply. If you do that, you can't create stable or reasonably stable media of exchange. So you have to put money supply at the very center of the engineering of how you want to run a CBDC. And money supply, as Dr. Moser knows better than anyone else, currently in the current world is done on a price-based mechanism. That's interest rates. You change interest rates, the price of money. What CBDC can inject into this one is that you go and add an element of a quantity-based money supply mechanism. So you now can begin to balance a quantity-based money supply mechanisms, which in the past, in the 70s, didn't work, with a price-based mechanism. And so you again create balance in a system which we all know this current financial system we have is intrinsically unstable, and we see it in all the kind of booms and busts that we have all gone through. So I just wanted to put this out there. Technology, identity technology, if anyone here believes self-sovereign identity is the future, stop it. It's not going to be the case. Number one, privacy technology has to allow for regulatable blockchains, which is inimical to the original idea of blockchains. And we have to fundamentally ask the question, how do we do money supply? And then we can have a serious conversation. And here's my last point, if I may. We all think that we have to leave that to the central bank as of now. So we ask the Bank of England, we say, why do you do that, and all the rest of it. But I'm actually on the side of the house where I say, if the central banks of now can't do it, let us do it. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an investor. So I'm asking the question, let me be a central bank in my local economy, and let me create a better money. So you are investors, this is an investor conference. So you have to ask yourself the question, which money do I invest in? That's an asset class, money as an asset class. What money should I invest in? You come to me, I give you my money. I do money supply. Some others, Circle has decided not to do money supply. It's a business model. And there are all kinds of things in between. So don't just think CBDC means really central bank digital currency. Take the private version of that. And maybe we create our own for the startup economy, for the green economy, and so on. Just a thought.
We've got about 5 minutes left, so I just want to, we've talked a lot about the future and where we need to be going, but let's take stock of where we are now, because obviously it was a pretty rough year last year. It continues to be difficult in the industry, and I'd be keen to hear what kind of impact that's had on confidence, on building, and some of these other parts. So Lily, can I start with you first? After what happened last year,
Sure.
Terra USD, the word stablecoin thrown into the mainstream, I know all stablecoins aren't created equal. Just want to make that point.
Thank you.
But thrown into the mainstream, and everyone discussing it. Has the effects and impacts and events of 2022 had any impact on confidence around stablecoins, around regulators being a little bit more glued in to what's going on, and trying to come at it with perhaps sharper claws?
Well, I feel like I've gotten a lot of questions, particularly the last 2 months, as to how are things going. So thank you for asking the stablecoin version of that, rather than other versions of that.
Yeah.
I think that, look, there's always near, medium, and long term. For me, this is my third bear market. We were joking earlier that at this point, we just kind of feel like we're all zombies anyways, right? And every cycle has like these shock and awe type of events. This year certainly has had its very interesting edition of that. I think that the promise around payments and better financial system, a more open architected financial system. We've been talking about it for a while, and I think only now are we still really at the trailhead of that? Because really only now do we have a stablecoin, we can talk about privacy, how exactly it's constructed, but a stablecoin with sort of enough liquidity and rails that are fast and cheap and programmable with some degree of community scale, right? And so, for me, actually, that's a big part of why, I personally am excited about Solana and, have been personally pursuing this within the scope of Solana, because I think that is something that is really important to do, and also is something we as an industry have talked about for years, over a decade, and it's also really important to bring this industry past the various forms of speculation and the various forms of, recursive speculation that have obviously not really worked out very well recently. And so as we sort of go from the trading, the perps, the 10x, 100x, whatever it might be, into, okay, this is actually a settlement, or a mode of exchange and a settlement rail for goods and services actually being traded in a real economy, right? You have to have, so it has to happen, and it hasn't happened yet, but we finally kind of have, I think, the 3 or 4 parts that we need to start.
And Roland, 45 seconds on this one, if you can. Yeah. Has this set back the industry at all? In terms of stablecoin adoption, in terms of how regulators...
but in a good way.
Okay.
Because it means we have to really understand what the hell it is that we need.
Right.
So I think I welcome it very much that the froth and the craziness and the lack of understanding of monetary economics, is sort of gone away. And I agree entirely with you. The challenge of the next 5 years is going to be, let us connect the real economy to the blockchain world, the real economy. This connection of the real economy to the blockchain world is going to make a difference. That's my view.
And Teana, with your conversations with regulators, are they now thinking about being a little bit harsher towards stablecoins? Do they want to regulate this stuff in a smart way? Or are they like, to hell with it, let's just let crypto burn? Because that's the debate. Do they actually want to regulate this stuff?
Well, I think that depending on where you are in the world, you might be taking a victory lap in the kind of mindset of, I told you so, and luckily we have a regulatory framework that's coming out in 12 months' time to solve this problem. If you're in another part of the world, I think the impetus around discussions that have been happening in Congress, for example, around stablecoin regulation, I think will continue with probably more intention. Of all of the market activities in the blockchain digital asset ecosystem, more jurisdictions right now have something in process to put guardrails in place for stablecoins. Japan, the UK, Europe, the US. So I think we will see movement on that next year. Does that mean that there'll be a tightening of what those regulatory provisions might be? I think we're pretty clear on what they're going to look like in Europe already with MiCA. In the UK, it looks like we're going to cut and paste from the financial market infrastructure regulation that already exists. So we kind of know what that looks like. I think we're still waiting to see what the US is going to do, but I think a couple things are really clear. Not all stablecoins are created equal. The term stablecoin is garbage. We should stop using it. Circle's USDC is really a digital currency. And for that to maintain stability, there needs to be, one-to-one, fully reserved backing. There needs to be, attestations and audits so you know exactly what those funds are and where they sit and with whom. Disclosures, et cetera. So I think we're pretty clear on what good looks like. And then, looking further afield, does that then give access to potentially reserves being held at a central bank? And then really begs the question, do we need a central bank digital currency if that's the case?
And Thomas, just a couple of seconds from you. The crypto market madness didn't really spill into the financial markets last year, but do you see any emerging financial stability risks?
So, I would see it like Roland. I think the fact that actually some of the hype is now out is helpful. That helps. But of course, the more this connection with the real economy happens, the more regulation will come in. So I think the more you have this connection, also the more fallout and financial stability risk has. That's why regulation will certainly continue and increase over the next years.
Thank you all for your insights. There will be the Q&A bubble at the next break, and you can ask these very smart people more and more questions. But for now, thank you all so much for your insights, and thank you all for joining us today.